Welcome to UnstuckAF, a podcast here to help you do you better. There's a path that starts where you are, passes through who you are, and leads where you want to go. We're here to hear from people who've walked that path or who are walking it right now. This is Orlando Bishop, Coach Orlando, and I thank you for listening as we learn how to get unstuck, how to be unstuck, how to live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. All right, y'all. Welcome to Unstuck AF. I know. I'm always talking about our special guests and how special they are. But come on, man. When you have a chance to have your baby sister on the podcast, that is most definitely special. Thalia Bishop, in addition to having picked on me throughout my entire youth, is a PhD in psychology and a mother and a great aunt and a whole bunch of other things, some of which we'll get to during this conversation. But let's just start off with the simple stuff. Thalia, say hello to the audience.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm both nervous and excited,
Yeah, no, that's about right. Me too. And so that's about right. That's about right. So we obviously could talk about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I've known you truly all your life, and you've known me just about all of mine. 22, right. 22. I spent 22 months knocking around here aimlessly waiting on you. So I did want to, we did have a conversation though that led to us saying, oh, wait a minute, that might be an episode. And so I'm going to go ahead and get right on in there like I do with guests, and we'll go wherever the conversation goes. So the question is this: how and or when did you know that anger, managing anger, dealing with anger was going to be a big deal in your life?
So it's interesting. I think to some degree I always knew, right? I knew that anger thing was like a thing, that showed up, whether it was from my side, things happening and me feeling that thing build up. And then however I would deal with that in the past and present. And then also my reaction to other people's anger. And so whether it was, family, whether it's, somehow I chose a profession where now like I'm around angry people quite often who are, managing mental illness. So I don't, we can have a whole other session on a whole other thing on that. But, and so I think to some degree, I've always learned to manage anger, both to, try to hold on to my own, because that can be dangerous, and to navigate what's going on around me, the people around me, being able to, read the energy in a space or in a situation or in an environment, because you have to, right? Somebody showing signs that they're starting to get upset could, be an important thing to pick up on quickly. So I think to some degree that piece was always there, but it was always something that I learned. It was more like a survival skill.
Yeah,
I guess. Yeah. More recently, I think things would start to come up and I would realize like, you are avoiding. Like I was like, you're just, you're, well, that thing is getting me upset. That person's getting me upset. I'm going to just go over here for a while. I'm going to just do this. I'm going to just remove myself from the situation. And so in many ways makes sense, right? Because, if you're thinking about this is something that has been a part of me for as long as I know. As a kid, I'm the little one, I'm the whatever, I was a little cousin, a little sister, whatever. And so, dealing with my parents. And so it was safer to just remove yourself from the situation, just get away. And so I still do that to some degree. And I started to realize like you're doing that, but like, I think you might be missing out on some stuff. I think you might be missing out on some opportunities to connect, like, because it got scary and I'm like, all right, I'll be over here.
I'm out of here, right?
Yeah. And then funny enough, I was in a training maybe a few months ago about race. And it was a really interesting dynamic, a really interesting training. And it was like, it was also a weird dynamic because it was a webinar, but like I quickly realized there might have been like 200 people in this training. And like, you know, you kind of, I did what Black people do, what we often do when we walk into a room or any other space. I was like, how many other Black people here? So I'm literally like scrolling through.
If the
and I'm like,
come when I'm in here.
Listen, I need to know. I need to know. So I scrolled through, and I mean, I may be exaggerating. Everybody doesn't always have the cameras on or a picture, but I'm it's maybe 20 of us. This is going to be interesting.
Right.
And lo and behold, there's all kind of like all of the typical foolishness that tends to come up in those spaces is coming up even virtually. And I don't even remember what the exact question or the topic was. But as I spoke up, you know, I think it had something to do with like Black folks. And I think for me as a Black woman, and that's a whole other thing about being an angry Black woman. We can come back to that in a second. But that like, whatever the conversation was, it was sort of this question of like people being afraid
of when it comes anger.
To, right. Of my anger, or just not even if I'm not angry, right? Me as a Black woman, me as a Black person, and, you know, thinking that like whatever their feelings are, and like me feeling like frustrated, I'm like, listen, like you coming into a space like that, I don't think you realize how dangerous that is to me in the world that we live in. And so at some point in the conversation, I was talking about it, and I think I said something like, I am angry sometimes, whatever it is. And the presenter basically like asked me a question like, you know, he's kind of like, I don't want to name it for you, but I think it's rage. You know, would you name it rage? And that was an interesting moment for me because I'm like, well, if I'm scared of anger, I'm definitely not allowed to do rage. And I had to pause for a moment, and I was like, well, that might be kind of what I'm feeling right now, though. And so I think that was an interesting moment in this kind of public space of having that said to me and me sitting with it for a minute of like, sometimes I am angry. Sometimes I'm really angry, you know, and what might it look like if I didn't pretty much get stuck every time I got angry?
Now, you talked about this whole piece of managing other people's anger. I so often when I think about anger and rage issues, I'm starting from my anger going out, my rage going, or maybe more accurately being held and then kind of, you know, force its way out. So that's a whole other part we can get into. That said, I feel like when we talk, just the two of us, you can say, for example, hey, if people started getting, you know, agitated, you had to be able to pick up on that. That's a survival skill. But I don't think that for everyone, certainly, and I don't even know that for the majority of people, even who would be listening, never mind in this country, that's quite the survival skill, or was quite the survival skill that it was in our lives. Our ability to walk into a situation and be like, I'm out. And I was watching this thing once, this interview with AOC. And I'm trying to remember it was during the impeachment trial, I want to say. And she said she went into the supermarket in DC and there was some, you know, MAGA type, whatever. And she immediately was like, yo, like we're heading towards something jumping off in here. Like that was, she didn't use that language, but like I was reading it and going, oh, I know exactly what she's talking about. And a lot of people reading this article are going to be like, oh, what are you talking? Listen, there's a vibe that happens in a place when people are getting hot. And depending on what getting hot entails, you would be wise to get on out of there. Okay, so I say all of that. Can you fill in some detail of what it was that when you were in situations growing up, out in Flatbush, at home, wherever, like what was the other side of that? Because sometimes I think it seems like, oh, it's so irrational. Like there's nothing happening here. Why are you so upset? But where it was formed, there were things happening. So can you kind of fill in a little bit more of that? Or is there a particular story that comes to mind for you that like, now here was a situation where I either read it and got away, I read it and didn't trust my instincts and things went left. I didn't read it. And that's what I learned. I better start reading it. Like, can you give a little bit of context around that?
It's so interesting as you were asking that question. I'm having like these flashes from, interestingly enough, like very different times in life. You know, some recent, some old, some whatever. There's a part of me that's like, be careful what you share because this is going to get recorded. And you're going to be like, why did I tell that damn story? But whatever, like I always remember once being in elementary school, Flatbush, you know, Brooklyn. I guess that would have been like 80s, 90s. And I remember there were these two girls. I think they were like twins. I'm not really sure why these two little girls decided they didn't like me. I don't know. I don't really know.
Okay.
I have like no clue why. But they had an older sister. And for some reason, they like I don't remember. And I generally like I feel like at home we would joke around that usually my mouth was prone to get me in trouble. But I don't remember being that person in general, like outside.
Right.
And so, like, I will always remember, I don't know if you remember how PS92's yard was set up, but it was like you had the yard and then there was like a fence in and it was like a handball court. Kind of thing off to the right, or to the right if you're, depending on which way you're facing. Right. And so I always remember it was almost time for us to go inside. It must have been time to go inside because whatever was going on, all of us started sort of like running towards the building. And I remember though, as I was going, next thing I know, the sister standing there. And I remember being against the fence and I remember her hitting me. And it was one I remember the whole time being like, oh, like, I ain't do nothing. I ain't do nothing to you. I ain't do nothing to them. Like,
right, what is
whatever.
Happening right now?
But there's a lesson in that, right? The lesson in that is don't straggle behind, right? The lesson in that is, you know, you stay with the group, right?
That's deep.
The lesson in that is like there's nothing I'm gonna do. Number one is more of you, and number two, you're their big sister, so like you're bigger than me too. Right. And so, you know, I could be as mad as I want to be. I've also, you know, had a weird week this week and realized that like my anger go-to is I will often start to cry or know that the crying is coming. And that's still there. Like there are times even now that I get mad and I'm like, I'm just not going to talk. Because
I can have that at times.
I'm going to scream at somebody or I'm going to just start crying and everybody's going to be like, oh my God, she's crying.
Or both, right.
Right, or both, right. And so like I remember that. And then I think just the time that we grew up in, you know, New York and all that was going on, you know, again, you were always in sort of that survival mode. It was always kind of like, you know, often sort of that like, I don't even know why you're mad at me. I don't even know why you chose me to do ABC. And so we figured out, I generally was like in survival mode. You ended up like, you got a group of friends and it's like, all right, we're going to go through this together. We're going to make it through this together. Like, so I think that piece was there. You saw, you know, the anger. I mean, fighting was a regular thing in school. You know what I mean? Like I can just remember that. And in 5th grade, I had my first Black teacher. I don't even remember what happened.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And Miss Thompson, I know she had gotten married. I can't think of her married, you know, her name got married, but like. I
forgot about that.
I remember when she did something like on the first day of school to let all the kids know that like, all that stuff y'all was doing up to this point, we ain't doing that here. I remember she shut it down real early. So life shifted. Thank God for her. I think life and a lot of other things shifted at that point. I'm sure helped, along the way. But yes, I think, that piece was there. I can, remember the violence just in the community, right? A list of stories of, seeing my neighbor after she had gotten stabbed. And I'm just like, the guy who did it ran past me. I didn't know what was going on. And, but you learned very quickly, like the world, like you start running, like even with that situation, like what if I knew enough to know, I don't know what's going on with him, but he don't look right.
And he in a big rush.
And he in a big rush. And he seemed just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. So I remember, although in retrospect, I'm like, probably wasn't the best idea. Like I stepped in a corner to get out of his way. And he slipped, I think, because he saw me, jumped up and kept going. But even then, like knowing, you learn like something's not right. And getting upstairs and hearing her, like sort of walk and scream and all of those things. Yeah. And so, all of those little pieces, start to get put together. And I think there are places where the fear, you could probably have a whole thing too in terms of like the connection between the fear and that anger. Because there's a little part of you, I think it was a little part of me from a young age even, that knew life don't have to be this way. like, I'm angry that life is this way. You know what I mean? Like, I'm angry that I got to sweat through this. I'm angry that, the Reverend Good, or Baba Good, as I like to refer to him, is like, we talked about stories recently of just like some of the things that we saw. The moment I realized that maybe I don't want to see a doctor because we just stepped out and there's somebody there bleeding and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, all right, well, I need a different career choice. But either which way right now, that's a lot of blood.
That is a lot of blood. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. So the fear and anger in the world is not safe. Peace. I knew that domestic violence was a part of our parents' marriage. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily recall seeing it. I remember at some point sharing with you this like vague story, this vague memory that I felt like, I don't know, maybe I made this thing up. And then it was interesting when we talked about it and you were like, oh no, that happened. And even then...
You mean this thing?
The pulling, yeah. We're like... Go
ahead, I'll tell the story in a second because I do remember it. But go ahead.
Yeah, like, so all I can remember, and you can fill in, was that like, I remember people being like angry and I remember like pulling. Like I couldn't, and I remember the energy, but couldn't really place it, right? Mm-hmm. And that, you figure that I was young enough that like, this is probably a reason I didn't have the words. It's why we're so aware when it comes to children with trauma, the things that we think they're not picking up on, they may not be able to name it, but it's leaving that imprint.
Right. So this is where this particular conversation, this particular interview, as we've, been getting ready for it. And interestingly, we said we were going to do it. And then, I think I had COVID in between. And then I know you needed a minute. So like there's been a buildup. And as I've thought of it, I've tried to ask myself, well, how much am I going to be in there? Right. Because how could either of us possibly broach this subject, right, without some sharing of the fact that we went through a lot of things together? So that story in particular, oh man, we were at the dinner table, and you were being a little kid. I forget, like you were, and I'm only 2 years older than you, or 22 months or whatever. So it wasn't like I was grown, but you were little, and you wanted to go to the bathroom. I remember, and I want to say it was mommy who was like, no, eat, whatever the heck it is you was trying not to eat.
Right.
Trying to be slick and go to the bathroom. Or maybe not. Maybe you really had to go to the bathroom. But whatever. That was her take on it, was eat your peas.
Right.
And I decided if my child won't go to the bathroom, she can go to the bathroom. So now you became a proxy war. Mm-hmm. And I still remember, interestingly, I could probably go into that house on 49th Street and show you, like, my back was to the window here, you were there. But I went to pick you up, to take you, and mommy grabbed your other arm. And it was almost like, in retrospect, and I, me, like now what I've done with a lot of trauma is I turned it into a big joke, Mm-hmm. And so I still remember them pulling on you, and it was kind of cartoonish in my memory of it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, clearly you didn't stretch, but in my mind, you kind of stretched a little bit. Like, I think it was like maybe like an early version of me being like, you could just turn this into some funny shit,
Right.
And the thing about it was, and I don't know how long it actually took for all that to unfold, and I don't really remember how it ended, to be honest with you.
I don't
remember how it ended, but I can tell you that that story contains a key element of this whole thing for me, which is it could go down, and it could go down fast. Mm-hmm. Right? We could all be chilling, eating some fucking mashed potatoes. Somebody don't like something somebody say, and the next thing, motherfuckers are in danger.
Yeah.
And that feeling, when you talk about the world feeling unsafe, I don't know that people who don't experience that can fully appreciate what it is to feel that the world is fundamentally and essentially an unsafe space. Like, people talk about creating safe spaces. I'm like, the world feels like an unsafe space to me. Right. I have an office that we built in our backyard. when I step out of here at night, I look both ways like somebody getting ready to rob me.
Right. In your backyard. Literally in your own backyard.
In my own backyard.
Yeah.
And at first I kind of was like giving myself a hard time about it. And now I just go ahead and do it and give myself that, like, okay, there ain't nobody back here. You lived here since daggone 2003. Ain't nobody ever come mess with you. And the chances are ain't nobody gonna come mess with you.
Right.
But if you feel like you need to look both ways so you can just sort of let that go, then do your thing. But I do think that over time, these things play in. You spoke to rage, and I want to ask you about that with that unsafe space piece. That a friend shared with me that rage is distinct from anger, in that rage is anger plus helplessness.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so I you've already started to respond. So I was just curious what your take is on that. And as you think back and as you're looking at rage, anger, you on either side of it, does that resonate? And if so, what did you feel helpless against? Like obviously that girl by the fence, right? But could you speak more to that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is spot on in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like as we're talking and I'm thinking about these pieces, it's a big part of it is these times and these spaces where it's going down and I can't do anything. I guess I will always feel like I want to be careful of telling other people's stories.
You sure.
But we don't know who I'm talking about. But anyway, a situation where like we were, and I think it was when I lived on Troy Avenue, and we were like outside playing. And I remember all of a sudden police pulled up. And we like riding our bikes outside. And suddenly they were like, now we that family. Now we that family. Because they walked right up into our house. So of course, we're like, oh, we don't know what's going on. So we run up into the house. Our father had this wall mirror. And all I remember as a kid is coming through the doorway. The wall mirror is on the couch. And I'm like...
In pieces.
In pieces, right. In pieces. On the couch in pieces. And so, funny enough, for whatever reason, the kids didn't get shooed away because I got to stand there and hear the story, which apparently was our father and another family member got into an argument. The other family member reportedly was under the influence, potentially, of something, alcohol.
That's very politely phrased. Go on.
And they were having an argument, and the result of that was the person throwing a bottle. And thankfully, I had a little dodge to him and he ducked because the reflexes were still there. So thankfully he ducked. It hit the mirror, right? And so again, it's also as often this weird dynamic where the anger, the whatever it was, didn't necessarily have to be aimed at me. But there's also a feeling of like, well, if you're not safe, like if this is where we went for you, then what am I gonna do? Right? Forget about it. Yeah. And so I think, that helpless piece, I think, has been there for a long time. And I think, we often talk about the fact that when we have those traumas, we have those things, even as adults, almost 50 years old, certain things come up. I have gotten to the point now where when some of these things come up, I can kind of talk myself through of like, you're not the 5-year-old in a corner, but it's still
to the 9-year-old, but go on.
Listen, right.
Sounds very familiar.
But it still has that thing. And so I think too, part of it was, it also wasn't one incident, right? So we can talk about those pieces in terms of family. I can also talk about the many situations, and I could give you a range of reasons why, right? I could assume that sometimes the way the world treated me was because I was Black. It was because I was a woman. We all, at the end of the day, it was the intersection of all of those things, right? It was all of those different identities. I didn't necessarily fit in either world. So like to folks who were not from the U.S., I was one of those little American whatever. And then for the folks who were from the U.S., I was like one of those whatever, because I'm still the child of like whatever it was. And so, I also think about life in New York, and part of why I had to leave, just story after story. I remember one day going to pick up a coat that had been, and I'm an adult now. Like I am an adult and I have a kid, and I to the coat to be repaired.
Oh God. Yeah.
And the guy fixed the coat, and I got there, and I think, literally had the money in my hand. Mm-hmm. And I get there, and I was asking him, like,
I remember.
Can you do it for less or whatever? Can I pay less? This is a situation now. That person wasn't from here, Black person, but they weren't from the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so I'm confident this is one of those situations where they saw me as this little whatever. I just asked you a question. I literally have the money in my hand. This man comes from around the counter, comes around me and locks the door. And I'm like, whoa. Because now I'm like, well, wait.
Yeah,
like,
I was in a situation now.
How we get here?
Right.
And so we get into it physically. Like, he's grabbing me. My son is there. One of my little younger cousins is there. We are like hitting against the, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And it's so interesting in that situation too. This is a grown man. I'm an adult, but like, this is still a man. And I remember at one point, I always remember seeing a pair of scissors on the counter. And in that moment thinking, if you pick those scissors up, life as you know it will change forever. And so interestingly enough, I think there was like some kind of beauty salon or something next door. We're hitting the wall. Mm-hmm. And so people were like threatening to call the police, or somebody else in the shop was, I'm like, yes, like, please call the police.
Right.
Please. I would love for you to do that. Please call the police.
Right.
And so police come, whatever, he's trying to say I was doing whatever. I literally like opened my hand. I'm like, I had the money. Like, I had the money the whole time. I freaked out when he locked the door behind me. And so, police come and, he's trying to say he's going to press charges on me. I'm like, you kidnapped me. The minute you locked that door, it wouldn't allow me to leave.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, and I still have even feelings about how the police dealt with it. It was kind of like, all right, well, no, nobody pressed charges. Fine with it. Right, you all dismiss it. No, like, he put his hands on me.
Right.
And so again, but again, it's that, yes, I'm angry because this is happening. I'm helpless because I know at the end of the day, the police aren't gonna. I remember having a cab driver and being in the car with, a best friend of mine at the time. And we get to the place, whatever. I don't even remember what the argument was, but we get there and he decides, I don't even remember what happened because I know at one point I threw the money in the front seat. So again,
you got your money.
You got your money. But what cabs would do sometimes is they would take the buttons off in the back.
So you can jump.
So this dude locked the doors, locked us in the cab. So it was interesting because I remember I freaked out. And I reached through the window. They had the window separator, and I grabbed him and whatever else. But in that moment, you're realizing that like holy shit, like this. I don't, again, yes, I'm an adult, but like this could go really bad. Like I can't get out. We can't get out the car. We're screaming. It's funny because at one point my friend pulls me off of him. I kind of wish, because of course once he pulls me off, he closes the window. So now I'm like, well, now we really trapped back here. So interestingly enough, we get to the police station. He parks the car. We all jump out to go inside. So we go inside. We're telling the police what happened. As we're going back out, the guy's trying to say we didn't pay. I'm like, I did pay. I threw the money. The money's in the front seat. As we're going back out, he tries to walk out real fast ahead of us.
Get the money.
And so funny enough, the officer was like, no, slow down. So lo and behold, the money is there. So again, he's trying to say that I assaulted him. You locked me in a cab. And so again, but even in that situation again, the police weren't like, I'm sure if I looked a little different, it would have been a very different narrative of this. You locked two women in the back of a cab and wouldn't let them out.
Yeah, like what are we discussing right now?
Even if we hadn't paid you. And so, yes, I think that helpless, that keeps happening, right? You keep seeing these situations where the world is not going to protect you.
Yes. And I think that's, I don't think people can appreciate necessarily what that means. Like to really feel like it's just unsafe. There are a couple of things that you bring up there. That story about the bottle, and I appreciate the way you chose to tell that story. The bottle broke the mirror. There was the whole thing. There was an arrest of that family member. And what you probably wouldn't remember, there's no reason for you really to remember this, is that my do-rag because I used to have waves and I had a do-rag. My do-rag was on the couch because I'm super neat and organized and always put things where they belong. And the glass was in my do-rag. Like, I still remember that. And I remember being advised by our aunt who was there. And, it was kind of a family gathering when this all went down. Like, oh, when you get home, you got to wash that first and don't just put it on and da-da-da-da-da, right? Because, you're going to cut up your scalp now with all this random shards of glass that are now in your... Right. And as you were telling the story and that came back to me, it was like, there's a metaphor in there to be explored, which is like, that was essentially shrapnel, right? Like that was essentially like, and there was always this sense that, like, in addition to the fact that I might have the conflict with the store owner, or in addition to the fact that I might have the conflict with the cab driver, and that's a brand of scary and can feel out of control. Also, you might have a fight with the cab driver, and depending on how it all plays out, I could find myself in a situation and I ain't on nobody's side. Like, I'm truly not part of this. And it reminds me of a story I tell sometimes. I was at, remember Campo on Bedford, the Chinese restaurant? So I was in there, actually I was in there with Dwayne. And so Dwayne, for those who are paying attention going, who's Dwayne? Dwayne was like a brother to me. Knew him since second grade. Our families were just like that. We all lived in the same building. So the Lattimores. So I'm with Dwayne Lattimore. Mommy sent me to Campo, and Liz kids, a group of girls who lived on our block and were friends of ours. Like, I never had a problem with them. I never had a problem with them at all, and was felt like if I did have a problem, they'd probably come save my behind, frankly. But they let us just say they were not averse to conflict, and they came coming down Bedford Avenue. That bitch. So Dwayne and I immediately are like, hey, showtime. So we start following them. Oh yeah, it's about to go down. This kid's getting ready. Okay. So we go down Parkside, which was the next block over. And they outside this building and they yelling and they screaming and the crowd is forming, what's going on over here? Send that bitch outside, blah, blah, blah. And this bitch and that bitch and all the bitches in the world, right? And this dude steps out of the building, pulls out a handgun, right? And he just goes, pop, pop,
That's so safe.
Yo, dude just starts letting off and that might as well have been a starter's pistol. Everybody was right. And Dwayne, what was funny, so I'm running first on the side where, at this point, I'm in high school at this point, so I like run track. I'm an athlete. So I start running and I'm like, y'all ain't moving the way I need y'all to move. I literally hurdled the hood of a car that was parked and ran the rest of the way up in the street on Parkside because I was like, I am out. In a way, yes. Did I follow the trouble? Yes. But I don't even know what everybody's fighting about. And I could catch a bullet now. Like this has gone from ha 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 to oh my God. And it felt like that was very much a part of the reality. That it was like at any moment. And you wouldn't necessarily understand why, and you didn't need to understand why. What you needed to do was hurdle that damn car and get the hell out of it. I'll say to you though that I think then you start to process things differently in terms of anger and violence. And two things come out of that for me. That story that I just shared. One is, as I was running, I actually wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of getting in trouble. Mommy had not sent me down Parkside.
Nope.
And there's a reason why people who live in certain kinds of places are very clear with their kids that you have to do exactly what the fuck I just said. Because your stupid 15, 16-year-old ass gonna go wandering down Parkside and die. Okay, I send you down there. And so that's when I'm running, I laugh about it, but it's serious. All I'm thinking is, if I get shot, mommy's going to kill me.
Yes. Correct.
You know what I mean? Like, which is But that was my thought. I was like, she did not send me down Parkside. And that's all I could think was, I'm going to get in trouble. I got to get out of here. So that's that piece. But the other piece is that, so Dwayne gets to Campo, you know, however much later than me, we're taking off running. And he comes in, he could barely breathe. Like, he is doubled over laughing because he is laughing at me and how scared I clearly was. Because he was like, Orlando, we were standing next to each other.
And then we weren't.
And then we really were not. Like, he was dying. He was really dying. And he was like, Orlando, you jumped over that car. Like, what in the world? And I was like, bruh, it was time to go. That for me has taken a lot of work. Just to get to a point where I can at least walk myself through. It is unlikely, given your life now, that something's just going to pop off like that. But if I'm not mindful, if I hadn't done the therapy that I've done over the years, and most recently this last year and a half, actually I have a Black therapist, and I think Black male therapist, and I think that's been really helpful. Not that others haven't been helpful to me, but it's to start really working through, like, what has that ended up meaning in terms of my own anger, in terms of when I let it out, when I don't let it out, how I use it. I think it's taken a toll over time to be so hyper vigilant. And those who listen regularly know, I found out a year and a half ago that I have ADHD. So on top of sort of the whatever of the situation, also, it is my sort of wiring, that if something moves over here, right? And I was the person in the tribe, as in this book that I was reading, I'm the person in the tribe that, we're all around the campfire at night and a twig breaks and immediately I got my spear in my hand and I'm running.
Right.
And I think to have that basic wiring and then to be put in that setting was really a recipe for me developing some of the instincts that I developed. And one of those, and I'm just talking to you now, I'm not even sure what this, but one of those is that I learned, and I learned it over time. I learned that one way to effectively manage being scared was to be scary. So I've been in a position more than once where I have sold the idea that I might have a gun on me, and I had nothing of the sort. But I was like, y'all acting crazy. And I need you to feel like if you do something, you're going to die. Like, not we going to fight. Like, I'm going to blow your head off. Because I need you to hesitate just long enough for me to get the hell out of here. And it all kind of crystallized for me, and then I'm going to shut up. But it all kind of crystallized for me when at one point, Alex, your nephew, my son, was downstairs. He calls me and is just like, actually, he wasn't wrong. It was a kind of crazy looking bug. I still don't know what that thing was, but somehow some bug had made its way into that bathroom, right? And, from the backyard or wherever it came. So anyway, he's like, hey, get to work. That's Papa work right there. Go kill that bug. So I was like, I got you. I'm going to do it, right? I said, but here's the reality. One of these days, I ain't going to be around to kill the daggone bug. And I can guarantee you, if you in here with Mommy and Maya, they gonna look at you like, you're up, bro. So let me give you a trick. Because it is kind of scary when you look at something and you're like, what is that? I said, what I taught myself to do, and I'm teaching you now, is I get mad that you scared me. Like, the processing of it. And I didn't even know it until I started trying to explain it to him. I was like, you scare me and I make you regret it. My feeling when I go in and I joke about this, but I'm not kidding when I'm like, it's almost like I feel like I'm sending a message. Rest of y'all bugs, stay the fuck out of here too. See what happened to this one, right? But that's also what I do with people. Like, I let people know, like, hey, if you start with me, it's going to be a problem. But in part, it's my way of being like, maybe if I could get that message out effectively enough, I won't have to have no problems. Because ultimately, that really wasn't me. As much as I can fight and would fight physically and just I'm someone who will fight back, I don't like that. I really never liked it. And it was exhausting and it was depleting. But I learned that if I could just let people know, like, you don't want it with me, that was such an effective way to avoid getting into these situations constantly. So I guess where that brings me, you sort of talked about that piece, the scary to you, the anger you saw and avoided. I guess I'd like to ask you, from there, what did you do with your anger? Like, how did you express it or not? How did you utilize it or not? The anger that was in you, not that it was around you, what did you do with that?
So it's interesting. I think as you were, and hopefully I'll come back to, but as we're describing all these stories, right? I feel like if somebody else heard this, and not everybody, I think some people would get it, but if some other people heard this, they would probably hear these individual stories and be like, oh, well, that was just about you being scared because this. So somebody shot the gun, or you being scared because of that particular thing. But I think what ends up happening, though, like a lot of other things, is that all of this stuff is building, right? All of this stuff is adding. And so it gets to this point where it's programmed into us, right? So, the situation comes up and my natural instinct is to react in whatever way. So I think to answer your question, what happens is when I start to feel the anger, when I start to feel the fear, usually my first, step is to stop, right? And so that's to stop a conversation, to stop talking, to pause for however long I can. Because I think my first instinct is flight, right? My first instinct is like, I felt this fear, get away from, get out, move back, whatever it is, until you can assess the situation. You start to realize that sometimes the thing that triggered it wasn't really that big of a thing. Like I've really had times when that anxiety, those things come up, that I'm kind of like, what's the reality, right? There is nobody standing in front of me with a gun. Nobody's, trying to hit me. Like, what is actually happening here? Because my reaction, what I'm feeling, is not in line with what's actually happening. What actually just happened is that one of my coworkers, cut me off for the 10th time, and it's really annoying because he keeps doing that. But he didn't threaten me.
Yeah, you're not in danger.
Right. So, but I think what I tended to do with it a lot of times was, I guess it's avoiding it and packing it down. That's, you know what? I'm going to just put that over there. It's not that big a deal, whatever it is. I don't want to deal with it because I don't know if I open it up a little bit, it's probably going to, I don't know what that's going to look like because it's still there, right? If I stay around too long and let them do whatever, then I might really be in danger. And so I think a lot of times it was kind of like, just pack it away. Just pack it away. Part of that packing away, though, I think for me was internalizing a lot of stuff, right? Internalizing a lot of my own fears and insecurities, a lot of times internalizing other people's stuff. I think in a lot of ways it led to a lot of self-destructive behavior, not kind of giving myself the love, the grace, all of those things that I should have, right? Because you're just kind of holding it all. You're kind of taking it all in. Just be safe. I just would often just tuck it away. I think the other part, as I'm kind of sitting here talking about it and just describing it too, that's interesting is at some point, I would often find myself in a lose-lose situation, right? And so, I'm in the workplace, for example, and this person keeps doing this thing. I remember having this coworker. Two things. One, I remember having this one coworker was an older Black woman who, when she would decide we were getting on each other's nerves, she would do this thing where she'd be like, little girl.
Uh-oh.
And I would tell her kept telling her, like, I'm a grown ass woman. You're going to stop calling me a little girl.
Right.
Right. But like, I gotta manage how I use that because, you know, and so I'm holding it. I'm usually just trying to avoid, you know, this person, whatever the case may be. But then at that same job, I remember a situation where like I did like sort of like logistics stuff. We dealt with like shipping currency, and we would have to send currency sometimes to like other countries. But you had to have very specific documentation and have the shipment ready and whatever else. So there was a department that had to send us the documentation. We physically dealt with getting the money out. And so I always remember that there was this woman from this other department who's like calling me. She's fussing at me about us getting the money ready. I'm like, they're getting the money ready. The money will be ready to get out the door. Send me the paperwork.
I remember this story, but go ahead.
And so, so she's like, you know, whatever. She's just going at me. She's yelling at me. And it gets to a point where I've been stuffing this down because this is not the first time you came at me a little sideways. You're coming at me this way again. I might be in this bank office, but this, you know, I learned to survive, right? And you gonna keep. There's also I have a thing about you yelling at me. You gonna stop yelling at me?
We're gonna talk about both those things, but keep going.
Listen, and so she's yelling at me, and I finally get to the point where I've held it, and between this one over here with the little girl and this one over here getting sarcastic, I've been holding it for a while, and now I am screaming back at her on the phone, send me the paperwork. Send me the paperwork. So I'm yelling. That's all I'm saying. I've hit a point where I'm like, this is the safest thing for me to say right now.
Right. There ain't nothing else to
just send me the paperwork. She sends the paperwork. At some point or another, shipment goes out the door. Fine. The next day, I will always remember I'm sitting at my desk. And so the way we were kind of in this open area, like you could walk through our area where myself and like two other people sat to like go to some other offices. And so some folks from the higher ups, like from that transportation department come down. I remember it was this tall white guy and then this Indian guy. And so I'm sitting there. So my back is to the door, which isn't ideal anyway, but my back is to it. So they come in and I'm still sitting in my seat. And it's so funny because again, it comes back to even in these moments, I'm doing a lot of work because I have to remind myself. So they come in, I'm sitting down, they're standing up. So already there's a dynamic here that I don't like. Now in my head, I know I'm pretty darn confident they're not going. These men are not going to hit me, right? But I don't like this. Then I don't like this dynamic as it is because y'all standing over me, and I feel like some foolishness is coming. And so I remember them coming in, and they're talking to me about this situation, and they told me that the woman was scared.
I remember all of this, and I really want to dig into it a little more, but keep going. Yeah.
And I remember I've done a lot of work in terms of therapy, in terms of understanding, you know, race and things like that now that I don't think I had then.
Right.
But even then, I was like, oh, hell no.
This is some bullshit.
Explain to me what about send me the paperwork is scary. Yeah. Because we were yelling at each other. So you can't tell me it was the yelling. Right. I didn't threaten her. I never said I'm going to come up there and smack you and take the paperwork. Right. So if she was scared, it sounds to me like that's not for her to work out because I never threatened her. And so, you know, it was really interesting because they wanted me to apologize. And I remember being like, no.
Yeah.
And we stood there for a while and I turned around in my chair and started working again and eventually heard them walk away. But even there, right, there's this message that like, I am not even allowed to, not only do I have to hold the stuff, right? I have to hold it and hold it and hold it and stay safe. But in the moments when I'm like, all right, now I've had enough. We're going to stop this foolishness. You're going to stop. I gotta be careful because, and if it was not the first time in my professional career where somebody was afraid of me.
I also find, and it's interesting, there are a lot of dynamics to it. But in that story, and I remember that story, and I want to go back to a conversation you and I had because you after they left you alone, you stepped outside and called me. But there's an element of what you just said that I think is also a real challenge, which is we're Black. Like, to just put it as bluntly as we can. We've both chosen to wear our hair a certain way. And we can, you know, that's a whole other, that could be its own episode.
Right.
I always have resented when I feel that you came in here yelling. Now, if you had asked me, hey, Orlando, which one of us could yell louder? I would have told you it's probably me.
Right. Yeah.
So I wouldn't have chosen that way of having this conflict if I had been you. But you chose it. Now, Because I'm a black guy with a big, booming, bassy voice. Now, I'm fucking wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, we are yelling.
Right.
So that is a thing of mine. So when you called me, I still remember you calling me and telling me the whole story. Because at first when you were telling it, you said y'all were yelling at each other. I was like, oh, what'd you say? Like,
send me the paperwork. Send me the paperwork.
You know what I'm saying? Because I was like, you said, don't make me come up there or whatever. Then I'd have been like, well, but you said what you had to say and you stuck to the script. And I remember you, being upset. And I remember, I'll ask you if you remember what I said to you, because it's something I will often say to you when people are messing with you and you're trying to figure out how to navigate them. But you might not.
I don't remember offhand.
I told you, I said, you ain't do nothing. And you go back in there and you don't take no shit off nobody.
That sounds about right.
You've heard that from me a couple times, right? You go back in there and you don't take no shit off nobody. And I'm glad I've given you that advice over the years. I'm not glad that you then employ it when you're dealing with me. I didn't mean you take shit off me. You just don't take shit off them.
No, you didn't say that. That's not what you said. You said nobody.
Yeah, I did miss my opportunity. But really, and I bring that up because it is really hard when there's this thing and it feels a little out of control to understand how and when it's appropriate to employ it. Mm-hmm. If somebody's yelling at you on the phone and you're saying, give me the paperwork, like you didn't violate anything by saying like, okay, if this is how you're going to engage, I'm going to meet you there. Mm-hmm. But then it does sometimes blow back on us. And there's this, I experience a frustration around that because I'm like, and I've worked on it a lot, but it's this feeling like, well, hold on a second. Like, even the fact that I now have to have this conversation with you and now you're going to walk away and decide that I was this or that, or I wasn't being a team player and all these things. Ain't nobody tell that lady yell at me in the first goddamn place. You know what I mean? And that's been a struggle for me. And I wonder for you, what you've done with that. Like, are you still working on that? Is that something where you're like, okay, this is a moment where I have every right to be angry, but I know how I do anger and it's going to take a left and the whole story is going to now be my anger. No matter what this other person did or didn't do, the whole daggone story is going to be my anger. I'm just wondering what you've done with that or not.
I think it's a work of progress in a lot of ways. It's interesting as like you were describing us. I think part of what comes up for me a lot of times is, I am tall, especially for a woman, right? So I'm about 5'10". I am not dainty or petite. I am dark skinned, I have locks, now half my head is shaved. But I say all of that to say, I think I know, like I was joked around when I was in grad school, sometimes I'd be like walking down this hall. We had this long hallway in one of the buildings at the school or the clinic where like, it's this long narrow hallway. I used to always love when people would act like they didn't see me. Like we'll pass each other, like under normal circumstances, you cannot miss me. Right, you just can't. Right. And so, I say that to say that I think too, I have learned that like, because of my height, because of my presence. And I think that there were times in life where I would try to make myself smaller. I'm going to try to pull back. I'm going to try not to. I have definitely more and more gotten to a point where I'm like, no.
And I love it. But
if you, I've gotten a lot better at, I didn't threaten anybody. I wasn't flipping any tables. If you're scared, that sounds like something you need to work out, right? The hard part though for me is I can say that and I'll mean it, but it's still another hit, right? It's still another hit. Where I'm working now is in a forensic hospital, like a hospital setting. And even here, the unit I'm on now, maybe a year and a half ago, had a situation where we're going back and forth, we're having some, disagreements within the team. And one of the doctors refers to me as aggressive.
Uh-oh.
And I remember even in that moment being like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, am I ever going to get away from this? Because right now we're both talking to each other in the same way, right? We're both aggravated. We're both whatever. I haven't threatened anybody. I ain't flipping any tables. I didn't say I'm going to do ABC. And here we are. And so it's interesting. And as I think about it in that moment, I talked for a minute or two. I did say enough to say, one thing that was different was that I did say, like, listen, if you don't understand on a basic level, if you can't understand why it was inappropriate rather, for you to use that language with a Black woman, we could have, that's a whole other conversation.
That's right. We could deal with that.
Yeah, right. But I also remember the level of anger, I left the room. I remember leaving a room and going out to another room and crying for a minute and then being like, you're going back in that room. So I think, have I learned to deal with it? Yes and no. I've gotten yes, no, and I guess somewhere in between. I do think that I'm getting more and more to the point where I'm not holding this. And that can be about this. That can be a lot of things. So in those moments when I'm like, if you're scared, that's yours to work to do. I'm going to let you know that. Like, I'm going to give it back. So he gave me that, right? He gave me that, whatever biases and whatever else he has. And I remember I sent the email and gave them like a few resources to let them know why that was inappropriate as well. Like y'all read this because y'all not doing this stuff again. I did let him know, like, have it back. Whereas I think there was probably a time when I might have just shut down. I'd have left the room and stepped out and not gone back. But when I do that, I keep it. I keep all of it.
I think it's important for us, and I think in terms of the conversation and the episode and so on, to address some of the real world impacts and implications of what you just described, right? So there's a kid named Trayvon Martin. He walk in, he go get his little Skittles, his little iced tea. George Zimmerman decides, first of all, he looked like somebody who's up to no good. But here's where what you're describing has some real world implications. George Zimmerman had a 9 on him. I've held a 9. I've shot a 9. I know what a 9 feels like.
Okay.
I've eaten Skittles. I've had iced tea before. 2 of those things did not feel like tools of violence, and one of them did.
Correct.
Only in the context of a racist society could it be plausible that the person with the 2 not violent things was the one who came into all this looking for a problem.
Right.
I mean, just like as a matter of logic, if you switched what they each had, is there any version of the world where we could tell the story that, oh no, Trayvon and his 9 was scared?
No. We know the answer.
You can't tell that story. You can't. No. The only way you can even if you reject it ultimately, the only way you ever even get to that story is Black kid, inherently dangerous. And these stories are easy to believe. And I think it's why a lot of times violence against Black women isn't addressed the way it's supposed to be, because the feeling is she's a Black woman. If she wants to fight, she can fight. She can take care of herself. She can do her own. And the protections you're talking about when you get trapped in that cab, I'm sorry, but ain't nobody pulling that shit on the Upper West Side.
Oh, are you kidding?
You know what I'm saying? I mean, they might pull it.
He would have gotten arrested that day.
I think that it's important for us to also think about how beyond our, individual interactions, these pieces come into play and can make life additionally complicated. Because if I'm scary from jump, then I ain't even got to yell on the phone. I can just stare at you. Oh, he was trying to intimidate me. He was staring at me. And I say something, or he said, what's inherent in that is like, you're scary. I already found you scary in the first place. And now, Dr. Bishop, that you are visibly upset, I'm tapping out. And that's been a source of frustration for me over the years. When we talk about managing anger, some of my anger tends to be, I'm pissed that I'm pissed. Because now I know there's going to be all this other, frankly, shit. Now I can't just be pissed or so, you know, you get pissed around the wrong people. Now this one's crying. Now I got to go deal with the fact that you're crying.
No, that's a whole other.
What that got to do with me? Right now, you know, and I do think that's been incredibly challenging. So when you say that and you're in that room and you get called aggressive and you're like, how the fuck we get here? Like that really resonates for me. Because we are entitled to our anger. We're not necessarily entitled to any expression of our anger. And I want to speak to that as I move out of this. But we are entitled to our feelings. And just like anybody else can be angry, we can be angry too. But I want to come back down to the personal. You and I mean, you know, I did a piece once, a storytelling piece that I ended up doing in rhyme. And I started writing that when we were together, actually, in Panama. And I said, we couldn't do shit about our pops and our mother. So me and Thalia beat the shit out of each other. We fought. We fought physically, we fought a lot. And in some ways, I wouldn't say it's shaped our relationship, but I think it's definitely a part of our relationship. And as far as you're comfortable going there or feel like you have the words to go, I guess I'm curious what that's meant to you and what that means to you. And in part because it's fucked up, but I think in some ways you could be your full angry self with me. Like in a weird way, and I look back on it, it's like some of those moments were probably our most honest moments as people because we didn't place some of the stuff through that filter. And I think, I don't call it good or bad. I'm just gonna say, I think there were some times where you might have bitten your tongue and went into another room at work. As we were coming along or whatever, you didn't need to do that, and you didn't choose to do that with me. And same with me, that I let it out a lot of times, even if stuff did build up. But when we let it out, we let it out. And I'm just curious what your take is on that and how you feel that has or hasn't impacted some of the other things we've been discussing around how you manage anger and deal with it.
I think in terms of you and I and like the growing up piece, I think like you said, like without, you know, being careful about labeling it, I think it was that, you know, to me, it was not a healthy expression of anger, right? It wasn't a healthy way to process those things. To me, it was a representation of, you have these two kids who have not been shown how to manage disagreements, talk through, process feelings without it resorting to violence, whether that's words, whether that's physical violence, right? And so, you know, I think, you know, part of what ends up happening is, I say, you know, for me, is that I think it was part of that whole story of, I'm going to hold, like, I do think you still end up realizing at some point, well, if I don't want to fight, if I don't want it to get there, because it gets bad, right? If I don't want it to get there, then I should just stop. Just don't say anything. Just hold it, just ignore it, whatever the case may be, right? I think, too, there was a certain degree of, you know, again, like, when it gets bad, like, I can remember, you know, I'm a girl, I'm a little younger. And so, like, I used to joke around sometimes that, like, yeah, like, you know, my brother and I fight, I'm a little sister, but, like, I'll throw something, I'll blah, 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 whatever. But then, like, you think about it, and it's like, what was an argument about what TV show to watch is now resulting in, like, you know, me throwing something across the room. And so I think, you know, when it comes to the anger, yes, I think that there was some letting it go. I worry sometimes, or, you know, I look back on it sometimes and I'm like, I wish we had been given the resources, the space, though, to process through that anger in a different way.
Yeah.
Because, you know what I mean? You get a couple of years of that happening, and that in itself takes its toll, right? And so, you know, I remember there was one time, I don't know if you remember this, like, it was a one time a few years ago, there was something going on, you know, with one put us in, like, a family member related to, like, Facebook. But whatever happened, like, you were upset in terms of like the conversation or not being able to have a conversation with a family member. And I always remember we got to the restaurant and or gas station because we were going to pick up dinner. And it was this point where you started to yell like in the car. And it was a situation where I was like, I know Alonda's not mad at me. Like, I know that Alana's not mad at me. But I always remember being in the passenger seat and having to like freezing up and having to talk myself through, Alana's not mad at you. Alana's not going to harm you in any way. You know why Alana's upset. Just take a deep breath and y'all can finish talking and blah, blah, blah. Right. And so, I think it's that piece of like figuring out. So yes, I think we did express our anger. We did the best we could with what we had. We used the tools that we had. I definitely think that we have both been, lucky, blessed to have both been very open to like therapy through the years. And so that to like now be able to even have this conversation.
Yeah. This was born of a conversation we had. And what struck me was independent of one another. We'd both been having this conversation in our own therapy of like, I gotta deal with this.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because one of the ways that it comes up for me is that I learned to be scary when I needed to be, or when I felt I needed to be. And I can be big, I can be loud, but oftentimes I did that as a protector. You and I could tell stories of times that like I channeled my anger in a direction quite intentionally to look out. I tell friends this story all the time. I'll tell it here that there was this guy, his name I won't protect. No, I'm kidding. But there was this guy, Dwight. I still remember Dwight. Dwight lived in our building and we were in high school at this point. And apparently, so I come back around. I'd been at football game or wherever I had been, and I come back around, and we're all hanging out. It's me, Dwayne, John, whoever, and Dwayne goes, "Oh, Dwight called you a punk." You remember this? You remember the story?
Not a fan.
Yeah, so he goes, "Dwight called you a punk." So I'm like, "Wait, what?" And that's another thing in all this that we grew up in. It was like, I found that it was very important. Like, you can't let somebody feel they can take your lunch money, or else now you're going to have to fight for your damn lunch money every day. So you got to, So Dwight said, I'm a punk. So that's like red flag right there. Like, well, that's going to need to be addressed. And the story was he was teasing you or bothering you or whatever it was in the hallway. And Dwayne said, you better stop. That's Orlando's sister. And he said, I don't care. Orlando a punk.
That piece I kind of remember. Okay.
Now, what was kind of interesting when we talk about the avoiding and right, I remember your face when Dwayne told me what happened. And I remember knowing you were like, if I wanted him to know, I would have told him. Like, your face was like,
I'm good.
Right. So so then it was like a Sunday, whatever. And I still remember, like, I went upstairs, I got changed. I told mommy I was going to the store, and I went downstairs and made a big scene intentionally. It was like, Dwight, am I a punk? And he was like, and I was like, no, I heard you said I was a punk. Am I a punk? Like, loud, like, to make it like I'm making a general announcement, like, don't play. And yes, I was protecting my name, but I was also saying it is, in fact, not okay to mess with Thalia. And you don't want this with me. So don't be talking slick to my sister, and my mother come through here, help her with them damn groceries. Do not play with me. And it strikes me that in some ways I was also like, we developed it and there were these ways that it was hurting us, but we also there were ways in which it really was adaptive.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that complicates the conversation too, because as you say, you want to learn and, have the tools and yes, but also there were times where, like, you better throw that punch. Like, we are here.
This is right. This is where we are.
This is where we are. And that was intense for me thinking back on it. I guess where I would want to go, and I know we've been on for a little bit, as you're sitting where you are now, I tease you about your PhD and all that. You think you all that now. But you've come so far and you've done so much and you've been in these spaces and you've done so much work. And I can even hear it sometimes when we talk, where you say, well, this is not healthy for me and I'm going to go, right? What can we generally share? What can you generally share for people to do in terms of doing anger better? But I guess more than that, what are you doing from here forward to manage anger better?
I guess I'll kind of use the conversation or the with you and I that you said like led to this. So I think for me, one of the things when it comes to that anger is, we've had something a few years back that was related to us directly, not necessarily.
Right.
But I think it was one of those situations where like you reacted and it was a big reaction. And it's one of those where like, do I know that I'm generally safe? Yes. But that, the yelling or whatever it is. And so I instinctively think I got to this sort of point where I was like, distance, right? Because I'm not going to deal with the anger. The anger's bad. It's just going to explode. The world's going to explode. I'm just going to. And so I think one of the things that we talked about when we talked about it a few weeks ago, a few weeks ago, was me realizing that it doesn't have to be the extreme, right? It doesn't. Part of how my avoidance when it came to anger meant disconnecting from relationships. And so, we talk about, we're talking about doing anger better is realizing that it's not all or nothing. It's not totally disconnect or get into this screaming match and now people are throwing things and, there are beer bottles flying across the mirrors. And so that's easy to say, right? That makes perfect sense for me to say. It makes perfect sense to me to say that if Orlando and I get into an argument tomorrow, neither one of us is going to physically do anything to each other. That seems 100%. But it doesn't change the fact that because of those years of learning that this is what this meant and this is how anger turns out, that feeling is not there. And so then my instinct is to go to one of the extremes. I'm still that is definitely something I'm still sorting through, both, on my own and through therapy of, all right, then how does that show up in relationships? Because I think it's shown up, it showed up in that situation, it showed up in our relationship. And I remember saying to you, like, whatever the situation was, whatever the disagreement was, I'll put that over here. What I am going to say is, I'm sorry I didn't stay. Right? I'm sorry I didn't stay and have the conversation and trust that it might not be easy, but everybody's going to be okay. And, I look at a lot of relationships for myself through the years, friendships or different situations, even in terms of family where, and I used to say it all the time. It's kind of like, yeah, like I'll forgive you, but like I'm never going to give you a chance to do that thing again. But is that really, one, is that genuine forgiveness? Now there are going to be people in your life who you need to do that way. Sure. Like don't get me wrong. But, in terms of the people that do matter, there's no grace in that. There's no forgiveness. There's no, we're both going to make mistakes. We're both going to step in it. I definitely have. And, can you actually grow from there?
Yeah.
So I think, as I'm trying to do anger better, a big part of it is understanding that like, you're going to have to do anger.
That, you had no way of knowing this. But that's a perfect segue to something I wanted to share. You're going to have to do anger better. I think there have been these times, and especially because, frankly, my anger has gotten me into trouble. That's probably a pretty passive way to phrase that. But I've gotten into trouble because of my anger, right? Or, expressing the ways I've expressed my anger or acted on my anger. Interestingly, so I'll reconnect this to the ADHD conversation, because I also think that's helped with some of this processing for me. With ADHD, I know but to share with folks who don't know, when you take what they gave me to treat it essentially or to manage it is Adderall. right? Now, logically, or for me, logically at least, or intuitively, I would think if my attention is bing, 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 right? Or like if I'm, reacting to that snapped branch off in the darkness, like they say in, a hunter in a farmer's world and all that kind of stuff, then it would be to slow me down. Calm down. You're all over the place. Put the spear down. Relax, right? Actually, the Adderall is a stimulant. It speeds you up, right? And it sort of increases activity in the part of your brain that actually is not active enough, which is causing, right, the issues with the attention. Okay. What I found is I actually am served by managing my anger and rage in a way that's similar to that. So rather than don't be angry, which I've tried at different points and for long stretches, don't be angry, don't get angry, don't get angry, don't get angry. Now I allow myself to get angry. And what I'm finding is because I don't wait till the 11th time to finally go, fucking what?
Right. You know what?
You've been around me before where I said, you know what?
It's so funny because I used to do that. And a friend of mine was like, I know that Thalia has hit a point in a story when she's like, you know what? It's like, uh-oh. So yeah.
Like I'm over here trying not to go off, but you know what?
Here we go.
So what I'm finding though, is it's better to say, hey, I didn't like that and it's pissing me off. If I need to just go ahead and say that, because if I can say that off one or two, or even if it's not a situation where it's appropriate for me to express it directly, if I can at least acknowledge I'm pissed, let me go hit my heavy bag. Let me go, right? Breathe, whatever I got to do, but to acknowledge it and experience it and go through it. Actually, the cure to my rage has been more anger in a way, because rather than the bottling and the stuffing, there's not all that pressure there that, like you say, once you feel like you might open it up this much and then it all, explodes. And so obviously I know the story that you're referencing, and the difficult conversation you and I had, and I was yelling and I was really upset. I apologize because what happened was I opened and there was the geyser, and it was similar to the car situation you described. You were involved tangentially, but it really was. It was just out. It was coming out then, and you were the one who was there.
Right.
And I'm really glad that you took your step away, and we were never like out of touch or whatever. But like for you and I, like we are constantly in touch, and we just weren't for a while.
Right.
And I think we were both working through it and wanting to kind of make sure that it landed well. We might not have, we didn't have a plan together, but I think we both knew like this needs to be done correctly. But I do apologize because I think I'm able now, not just intellectually, but beyond that, to recognize like it's scary to you when I get mad, when I go off, even if I'm not going off on you. It scares you, and it's not my intention to scare you. Actually, a lot of times when I go off, and we want to talk about that, back to that definition of rage being anger plus helplessness, that's my little kid coming in and saying, they coming, or we're trapped, or right, they're gonna take our lunch money.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I know what to do. Call Dwight out in front of the building. But sometimes there's not a Dwight in the front of the building. And sometimes that's not what needs to go down. It's really probably the most scared part of me that goes off the loud. Now, there's situations where I just recognize like I can do what I need to do to like move something. That's a different thing. I'm saying like those moments, those rageful moments, is usually because I, on some level, am scared or sad. And that is something I've worked on, but I realize that like I wouldn't want it to scare you. And a lot of my life, and this is true, whether we were little kids, and I was fighting in 92 yard because you can't talk to my sister like that. You certainly can't push my sister or whatever other little things went on. And you've seen me throw down in front of you because I was like, yo, do not mess with my sister. To us growing up and you being able to call me from outside the bank and me telling you don't take no shit off nobody, to whatever's the next thing. I always view my role is to look out for my baby sister. And as I look back, I'm not proud of the times that's not how it went down. And I'm glad to be able to say that to you. But I'm in a way even more glad to be able to say it to you publicly, because I think we might not be the only two people on Earth who have some challenges of some sort in this area. And I do hope that whatever it is for other folks, whatever that work is, and I can't recommend therapy highly enough, that people do the work, because it really can be, not managed correctly, anger and rage can be just beyond destructive. And I'm glad that it hasn't destroyed our relationship. And I'm glad that we both managed the damage it has done in some places. But I did want to apologize to you that I don't think I ever really accepted, and some of this is sibling stuff, but that like I could be scary to you. And yeah, I never want to be. Yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, I definitely appreciate that. And I think that's the thing that's interesting. And the flip side, I guess, is why that sometimes taking the time is a blessing. Because, again, by taking the time, it's like, yeah, I can say I was scared in those moments, and I appreciate, what you just shared. And I can also recognize that, like, I did my defensive thing too, which was to, pull back and go into the corner. It's so interesting because part of our conversation when we talked a few weeks ago was that, like, when we think about the anger piece, I think a lot of times we think more about our father and then realize that, like, but we learned some stuff from my mother too about anger.
You saw mommy get angry?
Listen. So funny enough, it's like I think about the fact that, like, one of the ways that mommy didn't deal with anger that was hardest for me, and I think was the shutdown, right? And so it is interesting then to realize, like, I know that does harm. I know the pulling back, the disconnecting can be hurtful because it hurt when it was done to me. And then suddenly I'm like, holy shit, like I'm doing it. Like, you know what I mean? And so then, I think when we had that conversation, that was part of why I was like, I did that, I'm sorry, my bad. Like, I realized that too. So I think that the flip side is we were both in that space when it was raw for both of us. Like, we couldn't have had this conversation.
Sure. Yeah, right. We were, yes, absolutely right. Because it was a 9-year-old talking to a 5-year-old. It would be just like,
exactly. We could not. Like, nope.
So I agree with you there. Well, obviously we can and have at times in our lives, just gone on and on together and talked for hours. I'm not sure that the whole world wants to listen to us talk for hours. But I'm really glad we had this conversation. I'm even glad to land on the thing of, like, mommy, my baby mommy, she taught us some things with the anger too. Sometimes I yell and I sound a lot more like her than I do like him, if I'm honest, and that kind of stuff.
And sometimes I shut down and just like, do it. One of the things is, like, is there a balance? He said, how do we do anger better? Do it. Have the conversation.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, do it. And I think, and if you don't do it, I think it'll do you. And then that's when you get into a whole other set of things. So thank you so much for being a guest, for being our last guest for season 2, for your honesty and your openness, for being a great little sister.
No, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
All right, we'll talk soon. Love you.
All right, love you too. Bye-bye.
You know what time it is. It's time to walk the line. I knew when Thalia and I had the conversation that we had that an episode with us was going to require me to do some work in preparation and to do some work during the actual conversation. But I can tell you that as we were talking, never mind once we were done, I was so glad I did, because that's the work. That's the work I needed to do on me. That's the work I needed to do for our relationship. That's the work I needed to do to continue to become the person I want to become, so that I can do this more effectively, so that I can coach more effectively, so that I can consult more effectively, so that I can just think and be more effective. And that's your walk the line. As we wrap up season 2, season 3 is coming. Your walk the line is to do the work. I don't know what that is for you. Maybe it's not getting mad. Maybe you're different than me. Maybe you've always controlled your anger, and I ain't mad at you for that, right? But there's the work. There's the business you want to start, the conversation you wanted to have, the work you want to do with your kids, or the way you want to take care of your parents, or the way you needed to just look at a way your relationship to food or alcohol or sex or work. It's the work. And when we do it, fascinatingly, we lighten our load. We make things easier. Do the work. All right, y'all. End of season 2. I can't believe it. So excited. And I just want to let you know how much I appreciate everyone who watches and listens. If you want to join the conversation, you know where to find us at We Align. We align.alignp.com. We're on IG at AlignP. You can check out the Align Performance page on Facebook. You can come check me out personally on Facebook. We are on TikTok. Like I tell you, we'll go where you are, because what we want to do is find our people like you, who want to align who they are, where they are, and where they want to go to make their lives better, to make this world better. That's who we are. Being our best selves, living our best lives together. And you know what that's going to lead to? You know what that's going to lead to. Because if we do that, we going to get unstuck. We gon' be unstuck. We gon' live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. Now, let's walk the line.